Look, nobody expected the apex predator of Karath Prime to become best friends with a human. Literally, nobody. The Galactic Council had 17 different betting pools running on how long it would take for the human to become lunch. Spoiler alert, they all lost their credits. But I'm getting ahead of myself. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Let me back up and tell you about Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist extraordinaire, professional danger ignorer, and the woman who somehow managed to befriend something that made a Tyrannosaurus Rex look like a particularly grumpy hamster. Elena had been assigned to the research station on Karath Prime for exactly 3 standard cycles when everything went sideways. The station itself was your typical sterile research bubble. All white walls and humming air processors dropped right in the middle of what could only be described as murder jungle. The locals called it the Crimson Expanse, which should have been everyone's first clue that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the best vacation spot in the galaxy. The fauna of Karath Prime had evolved in an environment where survival of the fittest was less of a theory and more of a daily gladiatorial arena. Everything had teeth, everything had claws. Even the plants had developed a taste for meat, which really says something about the general vibe of the place. At the top of this delightful food chain sat the Karathi Ravagers. Picture, if you will, a creature that looked like someone had taken a panther, a bear, and a dragon, thrown them in a genetic blender, and then added extra nightmare fuel for good measure. They stood nearly 3 meters at the shoulder, possessed 6-inch retractable claws on each of their 4 paws, had a bite force that could crush Duralloy, and oh yes, they could spit a paralytic venom that would drop a charging Tarkelian war beast in under 5 seconds. Naturally, Elena thought they were adorable. "They're just big cats," she'd said during her first briefing, while her Centaurian supervisor Kellex literally clutched his chest in horror. "Dr. Vasquez," Kellex had wheezed, his dual respiratory systems working overtime. "They are categorized as Class 9 predators. That is the highest classification. There is no Class 10 because nothing has survived long enough to study anything worse." Elena had just shrugged. Have you seen them yawn? It's precious. This should have been everyone's second clue that Elena Vasquez operated on a completely different wavelength than the rest of the galaxy. The incident that changed everything happened on day 27. Elena was conducting a routine survey of the barrier fence perimeter, which was really just an excuse to watch the local wildlife, without her colleagues hovering over her shoulder telling her about safety protocols and reasonable fear responses and other boring stuff like that. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't quite fit the usual symphony of growls, roars, and occasional screaming that constituted the Karath Prime soundscape. It was higher-pitched, almost a whine, and it was coming from somewhere beyond the secondary fence line. Now, a reasonable person would have reported this to security and let the armed response team investigate. Elena, however, had left reasonable behind somewhere around the 3rd grade when she'd tried to adopt a family of raccoons that had taken up residence in her school's ventilation system. She grabbed her scanner, her med kit, and absolutely none of the weapons she was supposed to carry at all times, and headed out through the maintenance airlock. The source of the sound wasn't hard to find. About 50 meters from the fence, tangled in a mass of barbed thorn vine, was a Ravager cub. And when I say cub, I mean it was still bigger than a full-grown earthwolf. But by Ravager standards, this was basically an infant. Maybe 4 months old, if Elena's hasty research was accurate. The cub was in bad shape. The thorn vine had wrapped around its left hind leg and was slowly constricting. The plant's barbs were designed to inject a slow-acting toxin that would eventually paralyze prey, making them easy pickings. The cub had clearly been there for hours, and its struggles had only made things worse. It spotted Elena immediately and did what any sensible predator cub would do. It hissed, spat, and tried to look as threatening as possible while completely immobilized and obviously terrified. The effect was somewhat diminished by the fact that its voice still had that juvenile squeak to it. "Oh, you poor baby," Elena cooed, which was absolutely the wrong response to a creature that could still probably bite her arm off. She approached slowly, hands visible, making what she hoped were soothing sounds. The cub watched her with eyes that literally glowed amber. Pupils narrowed to slits, every muscle tensed. "Easy there, little guy. I'm going to help you. Please don't eat me. I have student loans." The cub lunged at her the moment she got within range. Or rather, it tried to lunge. The thorn vine held it fast, and it ended up just sort of flopping angrily in her general direction, snapping jaws that could probably already crush bone. Elena didn't flinch. "Yeah, I get it. Strange alien approaching while you're vulnerable. I'd be cranky too. But look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Easy way, you let me help. Hard way, you keep trying to bite me and that vine keeps pumping toxin into your leg and we both have a bad day." The cub, predictably, did not understand standard galactic. It did, however, seem to recognize that Elena wasn't actively trying to hurt it, which was probably a novel experience in the murder jungle. Elena pulled out her scanner and assessed the situation. The vine had wrapped around the leg in 3 places, and the barbs had penetrated deep into the flesh. She'd need to cut the vine, remove the barbs, and inject an antitoxin, all while the cub decided whether or not she was food. "You know what?" she said, pulling out her laser cutter. "Let's start with introductions. I'm Elena. You're a terrified baby who's having the worst day ever. We're going to be best friends." The cub growled. It was probably meant to be intimidating. It came out more like an angry, squeaky toy. Elena started with the lowest vine wrap, the one closest to the paw. The laser cutter hummed to life, and the cub went absolutely rigid, eyes wide. But it didn't attack. Maybe it realized the humming thing was cutting the bad plant. Maybe it was too exhausted to fight. Maybe, just maybe, it understood on some level that the weird 2-legged thing was trying to help. "There we go. 1 down, 2 to go. You're doing great. Much better than the Centaurian I worked with last year. He passed out just from a blood draw." Snip. Second vine gone. The cub was breathing heavily now, watching every movement. "Last one. This is going to hurt a bit because I need to pull the barbs out. Feel free to yell about it. I won't judge." The moment Elena pulled the first barb, the cub did yell about it. Loudly. The sound was somewhere between a roar and a scream, and probably alerted every predator within 5 kilometers that there was distressed prey nearby. Fantastic. But still, the cub didn't bite her. It could have. Elena's arm was right there. Instead, it just screamed and thrashed and made its feelings known about barbs and pain and indignity. I know. Life is terrible, and I'm the worst. Almost done. 3 barbs out. Antitoxin injected. The last vine fell away, and the cub immediately scrambled backward, putting distance between itself and the strange alien who had either saved it or was playing a very long game regarding dinner plans. They stared at each other for a long moment. Elena, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, medkit open beside her. The cub, still tangled in loose thorn vine, leg bleeding but free, trying to figure out what had just happened. "So," Elena said conversationally, "I don't suppose you want to come back to the research station? We have climate control. And food. Probably not your food, but still." The cub limped 3 steps, stumbled, and collapsed. The toxin had done more damage than Elena thought. It was conscious, but weak. And out here, weak meant dead. Elena did some quick mental math. The cub probably weighed about 80 kilos. She could drag it if she had to. Of course, she wasn't supposed to bring unauthorized life forms into the station. And by not supposed to, the regulation specifically said, absolutely forbidden under penalty of immediate dismissal and possible prosecution. "You know what?" Elena said, standing up and dusting off her pants. "I've always wanted to get fired from a cool job." Getting an 80-kilo semi-conscious predator cub back to the station turned out to be exactly as difficult as it sounded. Elena ended up fashioning a makeshift sled from her emergency tarp, loading the cub onto it and hauling it back across 50 meters of hostile terrain while praying nothing bigger decided they looked like lunch. The cub, for its part, was too out of it to protest. It just lay there, breathing heavily, occasionally making small sounds that Elena chose to interpret as "thank you, kind alien," rather than "I will eat you later." Getting through the airlock without triggering every alarm in the facility required a level of creative rule-bending that Elena was particularly good at. She'd worked at 7 different research stations across the galaxy, and she'd been asked to leave 3 of them. She knew exactly which sensors could be temporarily disabled and which maintenance logs could be conveniently delayed. She dragged the cub to her personal quarters, which were generously sized by research station standards, meaning they were roughly the size of a walk-in closet. This was going to be cozy. The cub woke up about 3 hours later and immediately panicked. Elena had anticipated this and had moved everything breakable out of reach. The cub scrambled into the corner, pressed against the wall, eyes wild, making that low growling sound that Ravagers made when they were deciding whether fight or flight was the better option. "Easy," Elena said from her position sitting on her bunk. "You're safe. Look, I'm way over here, not approaching. See? Totally non-threatening." The cub did not look convinced. It tried to make itself smaller, which was adorable and sad at the same time. This was an apex predator that would one day strike fear into anything with a working survival instinct. And right now, it was a scared kid in a strange place. Elena had prepared for this. She pulled out a ration bar, her own dinner, and made a show of eating it. Then she broke off a piece and slowly, carefully, slid it across the floor toward the cub. The cub sniffed the air, looked at the ration bar, looked at Elena, and then decisively turned its head away. The message was clear. I don't eat with strange aliens in enclosed spaces. "Okay," Elena said. "Fair enough. Trust takes time." She ate her dinner, talking quietly about nothing in particular. The weather protocols, the annoying humming sound the ventilation system made, her theories about why the station commander had such terrible taste in art. The cub listened, ears twitching, still pressed into the corner but no longer actively panicking. When Elena finally lay down to sleep, she left the lights dimmed and the door to her small bathroom open so the cub had a space it could retreat to if it wanted privacy. She had no idea if Ravagers had a concept of privacy, but it seemed polite to offer. She woke up at 300 to the sound of the cub drinking from her toilet. Apparently, Ravagers were not above utilizing available water sources regardless of their designated purpose. She made a mental note to start leaving out a proper water bowl. The next morning, the real work began. Elena had to keep the cub's presence secret while also providing medical care, food, and enrichment for a growing predator that would soon be too big to hide in a bedroom. The medical care part was surprisingly easy. Ravagers healed fast, and the cub's leg was already looking better. Elena changed the bandages, which the cub tolerated with only minimal hissing, and applied a topical antibiotic that was technically designed for Tarkelian livestock, but should work fine on Karathian biochemistry. Probably. Xenobiology was more art than science sometimes. The food situation was more complicated. Elena didn't have access to the kind of meat a carnivorous predator needed without raising questions in the station's supply system. She couldn't exactly put in a requisition for 50 kilos of fresh meat for the illegal alien predator I'm hiding in my room. She ended up synthesizing protein blocks using the lab equipment during her night shifts, falsifying the logs to make it look like experiments on local plant life. Was it ethical? Probably not. Did she care? Also not particularly. The protein blocks were nutritionally complete, but looked and probably tasted like gray sadness. Elena laid one out for the cub on the second evening, along with her own dinner, another ration bar. The cub, now stronger and more alert, watched from its corner. It had claimed the space next to the bathroom as its territory, and Elena respected that. She sat on the floor on her side of the room, eating her ration bar, trying not to make eye contact. The cub sniffed toward the protein block, looked at Elena, looked at the block, then deliberately turned around, presenting its back to both Elena and the food. "Really?" Elena said. "You're going to be stubborn about this? You need to eat." The cub's tail twitched. The universal language of, "I'm ignoring you." Elena sighed. "Fine, be that way." She finished her ration bar, cleaned up, and went to bed. The protein block remained untouched. This went on for 3 days. Elena would leave food. The cub would refuse to eat it while she was present. Eventually, the food would disappear during the night when Elena was asleep. But the cub maintained its stance. No eating together. On the 4th day, Elena was exhausted. She'd been pulling double shifts to cover up the resource discrepancies, dodging questions from Kellex about why her quarters were suddenly off limits for inspection, and dealing with a stubborn predator cub that apparently had strong opinions about mealtime etiquette. She sat on the floor with her dinner, just a simple ration bar, and looked at the cub, who was looking healthier now. The limp almost gone, coat shiny, eyes bright and alert. "You know what your problem is," Elena said. "You're scared, and that's okay. I get it. Everything in your life so far has told you that sharing space with another predator during feeding time is how you get killed. But here's the thing." She broke her ration bar in half, not cutting it, not using a tool, just snapping it with her hands. The sound echoed in the small room. "I'm not trying to take your food. I'm not competing with you. Look." She ate one half of the ration bar. Then she took the other half and gently tossed it across the room. Not toward the cub, not threatening, just placing it in the neutral space between them. "This is my food. I'm sharing it with you. Not because you're weak, not because I'm trying to poison you or trick you, but because that's what you do when you care about someone. You share." The cub stared at the half-ration bar lying on the floor, then at Elena, then back at the bar. Elena pulled out the protein block, the one she'd prepared for the cub, and placed it on the floor next to her. "And this is your food. I'm going to sit here next to it, not eating it, because it's yours. See? Different food. No competition. No threat." For a long moment, nothing happened. Elena thought she'd miscalculated, that the cub still wasn't ready, that she'd pushed too hard too fast. Then the cub stood up, slowly, watching Elena carefully. It limped forward, favoring the healing leg just slightly, moving with that particular kind of caution that young predators use when they're not quite sure if they're about to make a terrible mistake. It reached the half-ration bar first, sniffed it, looked at Elena, who very deliberately looked away, presenting her profile, making herself non-threatening. The cub picked up the ration bar piece in its mouth, still watching Elena, still ready to bolt. Then it moved to its protein block, and very slowly, it lay down in the middle of the room, not in its corner, not hiding, just out in the open. And it started to eat. Elena felt something catch in her throat. She kept her movements slow and predictable, taking small bites of her remaining ration bar, maintaining that careful, non-threatening posture. They ate together in silence. A human xenobiologist and an apex predator cub, sharing a meal in a room barely big enough for both of them, on a planet that wanted them both dead, in a galaxy that would definitely not approve of this arrangement. When they finished, the cub did something that made Elena's heart skip. It dragged its protein block wrapper, the packaging Elena had left with the food, over to Elena's side of the room. Then it plopped down, not quite touching her, but closer than it had ever been, and started grooming its paw. The message was clear. Okay, maybe you're not so bad. Maybe we can do this. Elena smiled. Yeah, we can do this. Over the next several weeks, the cub, which Elena had started calling Razor because the name seemed to fit, and also because she couldn't keep thinking of it as the cub forever, became her shadow. As Razor healed and grew stronger, the bond between them deepened in ways that Elena couldn't quite explain to anyone else. Not that she was telling anyone else, because, again, super illegal. Razor learned quickly that Elena wasn't a threat. More importantly, Razor learned that Elena was an absolute pushover when it came to rules and boundaries. Want to sleep on the bed? Sure, why not? Want to investigate the interesting electronic equipment that definitely shouldn't be chewed on? Well, maybe just a little supervised nibbling. Want treats outside the regular feeding schedule? Those eyes are very convincing. Elena, for her part, learned Ravager body language. The ear twitches that meant curiosity. The tail positions that indicated mood. The particular rumbling sound that was apparently the Ravager equivalent of a cat's purr, except it sounded like distant thunder and made the walls vibrate slightly. The sharing of food became their ritual. Every meal, Elena would prepare her food and Razor's, and they would eat together. Sometimes, Elena would break off pieces of her ration bars for Razor, even though the protein blocks were nutritionally better. Sometimes Razor would drag choice bits of synth meat over to Elena's side, which was sweet, even though Elena could not and would not eat raw predator food. It was the thought that counted. The trouble started, as trouble always does, when Elena got too comfortable. She'd been sneaking Razor out for exercise in the maintenance corridors during night shifts, figuring that a growing predator needed more space than a closet-sized room. They'd been getting away with it for weeks. Razor loved these excursions, bounding down the empty corridors, investigating corners, practicing pouncing on anything that moved, including Elena's feet. On week 7, they ran into Marcus Chen, the station's chief engineer, who was working a late shift on the climate control systems. Marcus looked at Razor. Razor looked at Marcus. Elena looked at both of them and mentally started composing her resignation letter. "Is that," Marcus said slowly, "a Karathi Ravager in the maintenance corridor?" "No?" Elena tried. It was not her best work. Razor, apparently deciding that Marcus seemed nice, padded over and bumped his head against Marcus's leg, making that rumbling purr sound. Marcus froze like a statue. "It's purring at me," Marcus whispered. "Why is the apex predator purring at me?" "Because you're petable," Elena said. "Apparently, don't ask me. I didn't write the manual on Ravager behavior." Elena, we need to report this. There are protocols. There are so many protocols about this exact situation." Or, Elena said, and hear me out on this, we could not do that. What followed was a rapid negotiation that essentially boiled down to Elena promising to let Marcus run non-invasive medical scans on Razor for his xenobiology research. And in exchange, Marcus would keep his mouth shut and help Elena source better quality food for a growing predator. This is insane, Marcus said, even as he was carefully petting Razor's head, which Razor was allowing with regal tolerance. We're going to get court-martialed. Technically, it's only a court-martial if you're military, Elena pointed out. We're civilians. We'll just get regular fired and possibly sued. Oh, that's so much better. But Marcus was in, and once Marcus was in, it was only a matter of time before Lieutenant Aisha Karoma from Station Security noticed the irregular supply requisitions and decided to investigate personally rather than file an official report, which is how Elena ended up with 3 co-conspirators and a Ravager cub that was growing alarmingly fast and had decided that her quarters were way too small for a proper territory. They converted one of the disused storage bays into a secret habitat for Razor, complete with climbing structures made from repurposed equipment, a proper temperature-controlled environment, and significantly more space to run around. Getting Razor there required sneaking a nearly full-grown Ravager through the station's corridors at 200, which was exactly as nerve-wracking as it sounded. Razor took to the new space immediately, marking territory, testing the climbing structures, and generally acting like a teenager who'd just gotten their own apartment. Elena visited every day, bringing food, running basic health checks, and just hanging out because Razor, despite being an apex predator, got lonely. The food-sharing ritual continued, now with more elaborate meals that Marcus synthesized using his expanded access to station resources. Razor particularly loved the synth meat that Marcus flavored to approximate Carathian prey animals, though Elena suspected that Razor would eat pretty much anything at this point, because teenage appetites were universal across species. One evening, about 4 months after Elena had first found Razor in the thorn vine, she was sitting in the habitat with a meat pie, a spectacularly unhealthy comfort food she'd splurged her credits on from the station's actually decent cafeteria. Razor had already finished dinner and was lounging nearby, watching Elena with those glowing amber eyes. Elena took a bite of the pie and sighed. You know what, Razor? I think we did okay. You're healthy, you're happy, you haven't eaten anyone. These are all good things. Razor made a questioning chirp sound, which was hilarious, coming from something that now massed about 140 kilos and had fangs the size of Elena's fingers. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Who else would I be talking to? Elena looked at her pie, then at Razor, then at the pie again. You want to try something really weird? She broke off a piece of the pie crust, just the bread part without the meat filling, and held it out. Human food, probably terrible for your digestion, definitely not nutritionally appropriate. But we're sharing, right? That's our thing. Razor leaned forward and delicately took the pie crust from Elena's hand, careful not to catch her fingers with those impressive teeth. There was a moment of careful chewing, a considering expression that Elena couldn't quite read. And then Razor made a sound that was definitely the Ravager equivalent of, "This is weird, but okay." Elena laughed. Yeah, it's an acquired taste. Razor nudged closer, settling in next to Elena, a massive predator cuddling up to a human like an oversized, extremely dangerous cat. Elena leaned against Razor's shoulder, feeling the warmth and the steady breathing and the rumbling purr that vibrated through both of them. You know the council is going to lose their minds if they ever find out about this, Elena said quietly. Humans aren't supposed to be able to bond with Class 9 predators. It's literally in the regulations. Humans demonstrate inappropriate attachment to dangerous fauna. Like it's a character flaw. Razor's tail flicked lazily. But here's the thing they don't get, Elena continued. We're not trying to make you less dangerous. We're not trying to domesticate you or turn you into something you're not. You're a ravager. You're always going to be a ravager. Apex predator, capable of taking down prey 3 times your size, all that good stuff. She scratched behind Razor's ear, right in the spot that made the purring intensify. But you're also a person. You have preferences. You get lonely. You remember when someone helps you. And yeah, you were scared to eat next to me at first because that's what your instincts told you. But you learned. You adapted. You chose trust over fear. Razor turned to look at Elena, and there was something in those alien eyes that might have been understanding or might have been Elena projecting human emotions onto a creature that processed the world in completely different ways. Did it matter? They understood each other in the ways that counted. That's the thing about humans, Elena said. We're persistence predators, right? That's our whole evolutionary strategy. We don't give up. We keep trying. We build relationships with things that should eat us. And somehow, sometimes, it works out. She held up the remaining half of her meat pie. So here's to inappropriate attachments and breaking regulations and sharing food with dangerous aliens. Razor bumped his head against her shoulder, nearly knocking her over because Razor still didn't quite understand his own size. Elena laughed and steadied herself. They stayed like that for a while, human and ravager, sharing space and warmth and that particular kind of companionship that transcends species boundaries and common sense and galactic council regulations. Eventually, Elena had to leave. She had a shift in the morning, and maintaining her cover required actually doing her assigned work. She stood up, brushed off her pants, and scratched Razor's head one more time. I'll be back tomorrow. Same time. We'll share dinner again, and you can tell me about your day of lounging around, looking intimidating. Razor watched her go with those glowing eyes, already settling in for sleep. Elena made it back to her own quarters without incident, bypassed the security logs like she'd done dozens of times before, and collapsed into bed. She was exhausted, running on too little sleep and too much adrenaline, and she had a feeling that the whole arrangement was going to blow up in their faces sooner or later. But for now, she'd helped save a life. She'd made an impossible connection. She'd looked at something the galaxy said was too dangerous, too alien, too other, and she'd said, nah, I'm going to share my lunch with it. And somehow, impossibly, beautifully, it had worked. That was the human way. Humanity hadn't reached the stars by being reasonable or following the rules or maintaining appropriate boundaries with local fauna. They'd done it by being stubborn and curious and absolutely refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible. They'd looked at the vast emptiness of space and said, we're going there. They'd looked at the galaxy full of aliens who'd been spacefaring for millennia and said, cool, we have things to learn from you, but also maybe we can teach you some stuff too. They'd looked at predators that should by all rights eat them and said, but have you considered friendship? It was ridiculous. It was beautiful. It was human. Elena fell asleep smiling, dreaming of a murdered jungle on a distant world where a human and a ravager had broken bread together, or at least ration bars and protein blocks, and in doing so had proven something that the galaxy was still trying to understand. Humans didn't conquer through strength. They didn't dominate through fear. They succeeded through connection, through empathy, through that infuriating ability to look at the universe and see not threats to be eliminated, but relationships to be built. even with things that could absolutely eat them. Especially with things that could absolutely eat them. Because that was the real human superpower. Not their endurance, or their adaptability, or their tool use. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anything should be alone, that any connection was impossible, that any divide was too great to bridge. One shared meal at a time. The next morning, Elena woke to her communicator buzzing. It was Kellex, her supervisor, requesting an urgent meeting. Her heart sank. This was it. They'd been caught. Someone had run the supply logs, or checked the security footage, or just noticed that Elena had been way too happy lately, which was always suspicious. She dragged herself to Kellex's office, preparing her defense, mentally calculating whether she could sneak Razor off the station before they confiscated him, wondering if her career in xenobiology was about to end in spectacular fashion. Kellex was waiting behind his desk, looking more agitated than usual, which, for a Centaurian, meant he was practically vibrating with anxiety. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Please sit. We need to discuss something important." Elena sat. "If this is about the supply discrepancies, there's been an attack," Kellex interrupted. "A pack of adult ravagers breached the eastern perimeter last night. They damaged the fence and killed 2 of our Zigguardauer automated sentries before we drove them off." Elena's blood went cold. "Was anyone hurt?" "No, thank the stars. But Dr. Vasquez, this is serious. The Ravagers don't usually attack the station. Something has changed in their behavior patterns. The Council is considering evacuating the facility entirely." "That seems extreme," Elena said carefully. "Is it?" Kellex pulled up a holographic display. "The pack behavior is escalating. We think," he hesitated, "we think they may be looking for something." Elena's mind raced. Razor. They were looking for Razor. A missing cub would absolutely cause pack behavior changes. Ravagers were social, family-oriented. They wouldn't just abandon a lost juvenile. "I have a theory," Elena said slowly, "about Ravager behavior, about their social structures. But I'm going to need you to trust me on something." Kellex's anterior eyes narrowed. "I don't like the sound of this." "That's fair," Elena admitted. "But I need you to trust me anyway, because I think I might be the only person on this station who can communicate with the Ravagers, and I think I can stop the attacks." What followed was the most terrifying presentation of Elena's career. She told Kellex everything. The cub in the thorn vine, the secret rescue, the hiding, the habitat, the food sharing, the bond. She watched Kellex's face cycle through shock, horror, disbelief, resignation, and finally something that might have been reluctant respect. "You're telling me," Kellex said, "that you have been hiding a juvenile Ravager in our storage bay for 4 months." "Yes. And it hasn't eaten you." "Correct. And you think this cub is why the pack is attacking?" "I'd bet my doctorate on it." Kellex was silent for a long moment. Then he did something Elena didn't expect. He laughed. It was a wheezing, slightly hysterical sound, but it was definitely a laugh. "Do you know what the Council is going to say about this?" "I have several guesses, none of them good." "They're going to lose their collective minds," Kellex said. "A human befriending a Class 9 predator, sharing food with it, creating an interspecies bond that every regulation says is impossible." He leaned forward. "Show me." Elena led Kellex to the storage bay, her heart pounding. This was either going to be the best decision she'd ever made or the moment that ended multiple careers and possibly got people eaten. Razor was awake, lounging on one of the climbing structures. When he saw Elena, he made a happy chirping sound and bounded over. Then he saw Kellex and stopped, immediately going into alert mode, body tense, evaluating the potential threat. "Easy, Razor," Elena said quietly. "He's a friend. We're okay." Razor looked from Elena to Kellex and back again, processing. Then slowly, he sat down, still alert but not aggressive. It was the Ravager equivalent of, "I'm watching you, buddy." Kellex stared. "It knows its name. You named a Ravager." "He needed a name," Elena said defensively. "And it listens to you. We have an understanding." Elena pulled out a ration bar from her pocket, broke it in half like she always did, and offered half to Razor. Razor took it gently, careful not to catch her fingers, and settled down to eat. Elena ate her half, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to a creature that could kill her with one swipe. Kellex watched the entire exchange in silence. When they finished, he sat down heavily on a nearby storage container. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "If humans can bond with Ravagers, truly bond with them, not dominate or domesticate, but create genuine mutual respect and affection, that changes our entire understanding of interspecies dynamics." "Or," Elena said, "it just means I got lucky with one particularly chill Ravager who decided I was okay." "No," Kellex said, shaking his head. "Don't you see? The pack is out there attacking because they're searching for their lost family member. They're demonstrating complex social behavior, emotional attachment, persistence. And you've been demonstrating those exact same things. You found a lost cub and refused to leave it. You shared your food. You created a bond that transcends predator and prey dynamics." He looked at her seriously. "The Galactic Council says humans form inappropriate attachments. But maybe that's your strength, not your weakness. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs more of." Elena felt something tight in her chest loosen. "So, you're not going to report me?" "Oh, I'm absolutely reporting you," Kellex said. "But not the